Hello, and welcome to Module 5 of HFA's Trustee Training Programme, where we'll be focusing on the roles and responsibilities of trustees. In our previous modules, we've looked at how medical schemes are governed, the financial aspects of a scheme, the PMBs, and how managed care can support sustainability. Today, we shift the focus to you as trustees, your responsibilities, your duties, and the role you play in protecting members. Being a trustee is both a privilege and a responsibility. You're entrusted with managing not only financial resources, but also decisions that directly impact people's access to healthcare. The session will unpack what that responsibility means in practice, from fiduciary duties to governance to compliance with the Medical Schemes Act and King 5. I'll be facilitating the session, and once again, we're joined by Irene Zambelis, who will guide us through the technical aspects. Irene, thank you once again for joining us, and welcome.
Oh, thank you for this opportunity, Heidi. It's always a pleasure.
So let me take you briefly through what we'll cover in this session. We'll start with an overview of the medical schemes environment, and then move into what's arguably the most important concept for trustees, fiduciary responsibility. We'll also explore what it means to be fit and proper, what the Medical Schemes Act requires of trustees, and finally, how King 5 principles guide good governance. By the end of the session, you should have a clear understanding of what's expected of you as a trustee, both legally and ethically.
And I hope we don't scare trustees away, Heidi.
I hope so too, Irene, and I'll hand straight over to you.
So for this first slide, we will look at where medical schemes fit in the bigger picture and who governs them. So what we can see is that the Department of Health is responsible for the medical schemes industry, both the Act and its Medical Schemes Act and its regulations, and also for appointing and having oversight over the Council for Medical Schemes, which we know from previous training sessions ensures compliance with the Act and is our regulator. What I always like to do is reference the Medical Schemes Act, and this session is going to be no different. So you will find that I will put Medical Schemes Act, the MSA, and the relevant sections that trustees can reference the section should they want to. And I think the important thing with this is that we understand what a medical scheme is, that it is a body corporate capable of suing and being sued, but also that it has rules that governs what will be funded, what won't be funded, and how the scheme will operate. And it's these rules that are the contract between the beneficiary and the scheme. And we know it's legally binding. What the Act and the rules say is that a trustee needs to be appointed, or a board of trustees, to govern the scheme on behalf of its beneficiaries. And we can see that the word trustee actually means a person that has been entrusted in managing the affairs of another. And that's where the responsibility comes in, Heidi. What the Act and the scheme rules say is that both the trustees and the principal officer must be fit and proper. And that is, if you think of that, you have been entrusted with this role on behalf of the beneficiaries, it is quite a responsibility because you are governing how those healthcare expenses that beneficiaries incur will be managed. So the words fit and proper are important.
And we'll see later in the presentation just how important they are. Irene, as we said in our intro, trustees bear a huge responsibility. And this next slide gives a sense of the scale and the complexity of the industry. I mean, as trustees, we're dealing with millions of beneficiaries, billions in contributions, and a wide ecosystem of administrators, managed care organizations, and brokers. And this highlights the importance of strong governance and informed decision making because the impact of decisions is so significant.
It is, Heidi. So we have gone through the number of schemes, the number of medical scheme beneficiaries, and administrators, managed care companies, and brokers and brokerages. But if you look, there are 71 boards of trustees that have to operate efficiently and effectively because the amount of revenue in 2024 that was collected from contributions that those boards of trustees are managing is significant at 267 billion rand. So people with skill and knowledge need to be able to manage that, especially when you think of the decisions being made. Should a healthcare expense be funded or not? So that is important.
Yes, and the fiduciary responsibility really is the crux of everything we do as trustees, right? Can you take us through a little bit what we mean by this, Irene?
Absolutely. So when you accept that appointment of trustee, as a trustee, you take on both a legal and an ethical obligation. So the legal obligation means that you'll be compliant with how specific laws expect you to behave, and the ethical obligation is that you will be doing this honestly and with integrity. So when we look here is to always, and this is where the Medical Schemes Act is very direct, trustees must always act in the interests of beneficiaries and with loyalty. And by loyalty, that you're acting in the best interests of your beneficiaries, in good faith, with honesty and fairness, with care. And I think this is an interesting one, in that you're making informed and prudent decisions. So the trustees must have the skill and the knowledge to make those informed and prudent decisions. Deal with the confidentiality of the information, members' information, that it's protected, and that they have no conflicts of interest. They disclose any potential conflicts of interest. Because if you have a conflict of interest, you're not going to always be able to act in the interests of the beneficiaries. And that those schemes' considerable assets are being managed efficiently and effectively and with care, which I think is important.
Irene, a term that we hear often in the context of trustees is fit and proper. But I'm not sure that we as trustees always know what fit and proper means. Can you take us through a little bit about what fit and proper entails for a trustee?
Yeah, and I think, Heidi, with a lot of terms, we tend to use them and we assume people understand what it entails. So here we can see we talk about character and integrity. We talk about experience and competence. And we talk about time and commitment. And these are important components because trustees are not full-time positions. It's a part-time position. And you need to know, it's expected that you know the industry. So you need to dedicate time and energy and be diligent to understand it. So let's go through the two words. What does fit mean? And fit means that the board of trustees as a collective, and I think this is important. You can't expect every trustee to have the same level of skill, knowledge, and competence. But as long as a board, you are well resourced with those skills, knowledge, and competence, and that one has the ability to make things work, and you are able to manage your own finances, because you can't manage someone else's if you can't manage your own. So each scheme will have their own criteria for fit. What a declaration, sorry, that each trustee must sign. And it could have things that you haven't been declared insolvent, things like that. When we look on the proper side, this talks to your character, the honesty, the integrity. You know, you do things right even if no one is watching. That they take into account your previous conduct. So you have people coming to the board that are able to really act in the best interests of beneficiaries and have the skills and knowledge to make that happen. That's why I said to you, I hope we're not scaring our trustees away.
Let's hope not, because we need them.
We do. And there are 71 boards of trustees. And if you think of it, Heidi, on average, they can have between 8 and 10 trustees for each board. So it is a significant number of trustees that we are talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
So when we love the word governance and good governance, and what the word governance means is, how have you been able to exercise that fiduciary duty? So if we look at what the dictionary definition of governance is, it's the action or manner of conducting the policy and affairs of the scheme. So if you're conducting the affairs of a scheme, do you have the systems and processes, policies, and all that in place to manage it in a fit and proper manner? So that is what's important. And that the heart of the Board of Trustees is the values that they embrace. And when we look at that, why is this important? It's because it is expected with good governance that Board of Trustees are ethical and effective leaders. So ethical means you've embraced the values. You'll always come to the board having been prepared, having been honest and transparent and responsible. You execute your duties to the best and what is expected, which is important. And we can see here independence talks about no conflicts of interest. acting in the best interests of beneficiaries. So it's important that one understands that. Because from that good leadership flows into the strategic thinking and how that scheme gets managed. You know, I don't know if you felt this, Heidi. You can walk into an organization and you can feel a culture. You can feel a culture from the way people address you, from the way you get interacted with, and your way of doing business with that company will show you what their values really are. And I think that is so important, that the Board of Trustees understand that, and that they have taken the leadership in saying, we want to do things right, what is best for our beneficiaries, which is important.
I'm so glad you brought in values, because it is absolutely important, because schemes are dealing with people, and often people who are vulnerable because they're ill. So, and the trustees are almost the stewards of that scheme and those people. So I'm very pleased that you spent a bit of time on values. Irene, trustees must also know about the legislation that governs schemes, and there's a lot. I mean, and I mean, you said it in the beginning, but for trustees who've got other jobs, and almost all trustees do have other jobs, this is a lot. It's a lot to take in. But can you take us through, I suppose, quite briefly, the legislation that governs medical schemes, and that trustees need to know about?
I think, Katie, as you've said, the principal legislation that governs medical schemes is the Medical Schemes Act and its regulations. And I must encourage trustees to take the time to read it. And I think I've mentioned this before. And you can't read it in one go. You've got to do it in stages. Otherwise, it's just too much to absorb. But it's important because it does govern a lot of what medical schemes do. But like you said, it's not the only piece of legislation governing medical schemes. We have the Protection of Personal Information Act that impacts how you disclose personal information. You've got to have consent. The Consumer Protection Act also impacts medical schemes. Companies Act, and there are many others. Pharmaceutical, the Pharma Acts, the Drug Acts, that impact medical schemes. The principal one, however, and this that supersedes the others, is the Medical Schemes Act. The only legislation that is superior to the Medical Schemes Act is our Constitution, because there's no legislation that can be superior to that. But in addition to the laws, there are standards that are expected. And the standards include, like King 5 is a standard. A standard is not law, but it's expected way of behaving. And like King 5 is an international standard and way of behaving that is expected. There are also some standards that, like the Council for Medical Schemes has published, a PMB Code of Conduct. There's also communication guideline standards and many others that I haven't mentioned, but something worth noting for the trustees. Having said that the Medical Schemes Act is the principal legislation governing schemes, I think for the role and responsibilities of trustee, Heidi, in this slide and a couple more, I just want to highlight some sections in the Act and its regulations that a trustee should go and reference. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through this, just to mention that Section 24 says that no medical scheme shall be registered unless the council is satisfied that they have a fit and proper, not only board of trustees, but also a principal officer. And don't forget, it is the board of trustees that appoints the principal officer. And we've seen what fit and proper actually means. In Section 29, that the rules must provide that there is a fit and proper board of trustees and principal officers being appointed. But then also to note is that should the board of trustees not be fit and proper, that the council is able to take action, because one of the council's functions is to protect the members of medical schemes. So there is Section 46 for the removal of a member of the board of trustees if they are not fit and proper, that the registrar and council has the powers to approach the High Court, where they can, if it's in the interests of beneficiaries and material irregularities within the scheme, that they can remove a board of trustees. They can also appoint a curator with the approval of the judge in the High Court to replace the board of trustees. And this is mainly for material irregularities, or when the scheme is not in a sound financial condition. And that is something that we need to look at. For the trustees also to go to Chapter 12 of the Act, Section 57. And here we're going to look at what are the general areas on governance. Because we said governance is that you've got the right systems and processes in place. And also to look at what are the specific duties of the Board of Trustees that they make mention in the Act. So here we can see that every scheme will have, and this is now again in Section 12, a fit and proper Board of Trustees. But can you see here that that person must not have a conflict of interest? So if you are a member of a board, you cannot be employed as a broker or an employee at an administrator, managed care company, etc. And that's just also a principal officer. What Section 4 of Chapter 12 goes on is to highlight what are the duties of the Board of Trustees. And we know it can extend beyond this, but here we can see appoint the principal officer, and there's been some repetition in the legislation. That you keep records and minutes. This is very important. All of them are important, that you've got proper control systems, Importantly, adequate member communication. And you need to ask yourself, what is adequate? Timeous payment of contributions, so you must have a good credit control policy. Maintain your professional indemnity and fidelity guarantee insurance, because remember, a scheme is a body corporate capable of suing and being sued. Obtain expert advice where there are gaps, and ensure the rules, operation, and administration comply with all legislation, protecting the confidentiality of patient records. And I know that's a mouthful, but just for trustees to be able to go and reference it. What is important, they go on to say in that chapter 12, section 57, that the trustees must always act in the best interests of beneficiaries. It says here, at all times, with due care, diligence, skill, and good faith, and take all reasonable steps to act with impartiality and no conflicts of interest. So boards of trustees would be asked to sign a declaration for conflicts of interest, which is important. So
Thanks. Sorry,
yes,
it's such an honor being nominated and elected to be a trustee, but it also comes with risks. And I see here you've got a very nifty checklist that you can talk to us about.
you know, trustees must always ask themselves the question, am I the right person for this job? And what you will find, I mean, apart from reflecting on yourself, if you are the right person, you can add the value. The board of trustees must be very specific about the skills that they need in the board. So when you put out that you are looking for a nomination as a trustee, you've got to be very specific of who you are looking for. Then for the trustee, once they've been now nominated, to be able to say, do I have competing interests? Coming back to the conflict of interest. Do I have the time? Because remember, this is a part-time job, but it's a complex industry that you've got to get your head around. Who else is on the board? Is it people I want to be with? What are the specific expectations? Are you able to meet those expectations? Is there ongoing trustee development? Remember, it is a complex industry. You need to keep up to date. Is fidelity insurance in place? I mean, we know it's a mandated requirement. Have there been any negative media coverage? I mean, you don't want to be on the front page of any newspaper or at the council. And has any trustee or scheme secretary resigned? And is the company transparent about the reasons? Just little, and I'm sure one can add to this list. It's just the importance of having some self-reflection. And are there any concerning trends or red flags that you know is not something that you want to be party to? So it is an important question to ask yourself, because it isn't an easy position to fill, by the way, is what I feel. It's not
No,
an
it's not.
easy.
Yeah. I mean, another thing is the board charter, right? And you're going to talk to us about that, because that also gives some ideas of the responsibility. which is bestowed on trustees.
So every scheme must have a board charter because it sets out that scheme's specific roles and responsibilities. You know, we've been general now. This is what the Act says you must do. And the scheme has to always be compliant with the Act, but they may make it broader. So it's important to be able to look at what that scheme's board charter sets out. And we know that schemes can have subcommittees. The audit committee subcommittee is a mandated one, but there can be many other subcommittees that must have experts on them, whatever the matter is, an investment subcommittee, an ex gratia, whatever. Mm-hmm. But they must report to the board because all final decisions get made at the board. Also, the scheme can terminate the services of people they've employed. They can invest money. I've just given some general things that a board charter will include, and probably have a lot more. You know, the administrator appointment, the managed care company appointments, those are big decisions for the board to make. They may not do the contracting per se, but they have oversight to say, this is the culture of the administrator, the managed care company. This is how we want them to be held accountable. So having contracts in place and service level agreements with the right ingredients in them is so important, because that will determine the behavior of that administrator and the managed care company with your beneficiaries. So it is something to really pay attention to.
It's hugely important. I mean, this next slide is interesting because it moves slightly beyond compliance to the scheme's ethos or philosophy, the philosophy which may inform its strategic direction, for example. And for trustees, understanding this philosophy is important because it should inform the decisions, for instance, on benefit design or strategy and engagement with members. Can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Yeah, because you're right, Heidi, this isn't mandated. So, but I feel that the philosophy is the starting point for any business, including a medical scheme. And I did a search and I found two philosophies that I've included here. And this hasn't come directly from the scheme per se. I just did a Google search. And we can see here that for the first one, momentum, it says the philosophy is centered on providing flexible, affordable, high quality healthcare, putting the member at the center. That is an important point of their health journey. The scheme emphasizes a partnership focusing on preventive care, sustainable health outcomes, empowering members through technology-driven tailored solutions. Personalized health is in the philosophy. That should feed into the strategy and the policies, because that is your guiding light. If we look at the other one, which was discovery, that one needs to balance the individual needs of members with the collective well-being of the entire scheme, which is an important thing, to provide sustainable, affordable, and high-quality healthcare leveraging a shared value model to create better health outcomes. And I think that is important. Sometimes what we do find, Heidi, is that schemes will focus on sustainability, but it's a shared focus. Good health outcomes and a sustainable scheme. And they're not mutually exclusive. And that's what we need to be looking at.
It's interesting that those two philosophies are similar in lots of ways. They both, it's a partnership is the thing that comes through. So members have a responsibility to take care of their health, and schemes have a responsibility, to do their part in helping the members do that. And both of them allude to sort of the high quality healthcare, and both of them allude to sort of personalized healthcare that we look at each member and each member's needs.
And the technology advancements that we've seen have made that very possible. So
absolutely,
the trustees need to look at leveraging the technology that has taken place to be able to do that.
Yep, you're right. Yeah. Irene, we've talked about the risks, some of the risks at least, that trustees face. So risk management is an important and a very key responsibility for trustees. Talk to us a little bit about the tools that should be in place to manage and mitigate these risks.
I think, Heidi, a very important function of any board, of any entity, is risk management. And you can't do risk management if you haven't identified your risks. So what schemes need to have is a risk register. And there are many risks that go from marketing to membership to health to legislative, IT risks now with cybersecurity and many. I've seen risk registers that are a few pages long. And the important thing with the risk register is that you prioritize the risks, that they can show that they've applied their minds. Where you can, to mitigate the risk, find a solution. Not always possible. With certain, like geopolitics at the moment, we may see an increase in drug prices or a shortage of drugs.
Of course.
It's a risk, but it's not really one that you can always mitigate, but you can make allowances for. Maybe you need to put more resources there. You need to look at it. And then always make sure you've put a timeline to it and you've assigned a responsible person. And at every board meeting, you should be reviewing the risk register. Then what one needs to have, all the declarations, fit and proper, conflict of interest, codes of conduct in place, and then move on to your strategy for the scheme, which will have the goals in place and the action plan on how you're going to put it all. And this in motion. Remember governance. You've got the systems and the processes, but you need a strategy with the goals and the action plan to guide you that you're on the right path. And then policies is what gives legs to your philosophy. And there are many policies.
The very word policy, I can hear people yawning as I say that word because it sounds tedious, but it really is important. And there are policies that should be in place to help trustees in fulfilling their duties.
Well, it is. How do you, like I said, it gives legs to your philosophy. and it's important. And what I've got here is not the complete list by any stretch of the imagination, but also, Heidi, to let trustees know that once you've got a good philosophy, once you've got a good strategy in place, your risk register, and then your policies, this isn't something that a new trustee must come and do. There are policies in place. What you need to become familiar with the policies, and you need to review them and update them. And it's not that the trustee does the work, but they delegate the duty. And you need to delegate well. Because remember, by delegating duty, you haven't delegated responsibility. The responsibility will always sit with the board. That's non-negotiable. But they can delegate duties. And then they can review. So I think that's important.
Very.
It shows that they have applied their minds.
Exactly. Moving on to King 5. So King 5 is the latest version of the King Code. And this version includes a special guidance note for medical schemes. And that's interesting. Can you take us through some of the key points of that guidance note, Irene?
Yeah, I think, Katie, what I have done is for the next, I think, 3 slides, included the 13 principles that the medical scheme guidance notes includes for trustees. And I think we've mentioned a lot of these. Remember the King 5, it's expected that schemes behave in this manner. So it's an expected standard for them to maintain. The first one talks about that they lead, and this is important because when you lead, you're in the front and you have people following you, and that you lead ethically and effectively. So you ensure that the scheme's resources are well managed, that you've got a board charter, and that you act with due care and diligence with a code of conduct, and that there's individual and collective trustee evaluation, that you can say, this is what I as an individual have brought a value, and as a board, these are the skills we have, which is important. The next principle talks about ensuring there's an ethical culture and responsible corporate citizenship, that there's a code of ethics, guiding behavior, managing conflicts of interest, and there's compliance with all regulatory requirements and the broader societal expectations. You're part of a bigger system, a national health system. And the King 5 says, be cognizant of that. Then principle 3 talks about strategy, performance, sustainable value creation. And this is that you're meeting healthcare needs of the people, thinking about the Bill of Rights in the Constitution is what they're talking about here, and have a long-term view. And that's what value-based healthcare says. Let's have a long-term view, not short-term. Then about reporting. Reporting has to be full disclosure, transparency, and that one can see as a person that the right things are happening. And there is a King 5 disclosure framework looking at those conflicts of interest. The composition of the board is important here as well. Remember I said the scheme must put out there what their requirements are if they want a new trustee to be elected or appointed. And you need a balanced board with competencies, diversity, and independence, which I think is an important thing, taking succession planning into account and engaging with members about the trustee eligibility criteria and skills requirements. So, I mean, I had a trustee once say to me, but Irene, I'm not here because of what I know. I'm here because I'm popular on the shop floor. And that Haiti is not the right way to go about it. I think I was just scaring him about his responsibility. And then the committees of the board is Principle 6, where they talk that the committees report to the board. And here they're saying that it's arrangements for delegation to committees and individuals, and it must be objective and effective discharge of obligations. We've spoken about the subcommittees and how you can have, in addition to the audit committee, a number of others. But you need good communication between the board and the subcommittees, because remember, all decisions get made at board level. So here we come to Principle 7, the appointment and delegation to management, and the roles and decision-making powers of the board must be clearly defined. Remember, we spoke about the agreement and the service level agreements that must go hand in hand. Principle 8 looks at risk, and we spoke about the risk register. Risk governance is an essential responsibility of the board because of their fiduciary responsibility. So it's important, and that there's risk management practices in place. One has to be compliant, and they talk about a compliance register, Heidi, with the different legislation and standards. Principle 10 talks about all the data, information, and technology. And if you think of a scheme with all the member data that they sit with, and it's all sensitive information. And I think of all the cybersecurity risks we face these days and the hacking. So it is important that one can ensure adequate policies, controls, and monitoring mechanisms, and that one can analyze and use that data. Remuneration is always a sore point, Heidi. The council is looking at getting a benchmark of what trustees get paid, and there's wide variations between some restricted scheme trustees not being remunerated for being a trustee, and other trustees getting quite significant remuneration. And they want this reported fairly, transparently, responsibly, and to reflect the non-profit status of a scheme. So it's important, and that there is that policy in place.
Yeah, it's also tricky because there's not a one size fits all, because schemes come in different sizes and shapes, and some are open, some are restricted, some are big, some are small. It's not an easy exercise, that.
Yeah, and the CMS has made the comment once to say they can't see the correlation between a well-functioning scheme and trustee remuneration.
Yes.
So it is important to look at those criteria. And assurance, which is important, the role of the auditor to protect the member interests, and that there's effective communication between the board and the committees. and you'll be pleased to know this is last but not least, Principle 13, looking at the stakeholders, Heidi, and saying the board adapts a stakeholder inclusive approach to build and maintain trust with the stakeholders. And here you've got regulators, employees, administrators, brokers, healthcare providers, and beneficiaries. So you can see that it is wide and that there is effective communication. So that is King 5 in a nutshell on their principles. It's not King 5. It's part of the principles governing medical schemes.
Yes. Yes.
So what I'd like to just say, Heidi, that in summary, schemes should look at having a philosophy. It's not mandated, but I think it's such a good guiding light and helping them focus, leading into a strategy. That the trustees must know the scheme rules, not the benefit guide. There's a difference. And the Medical Schemes Act. And always come prepared to meetings. I always say, give your questions beforehand to the principal officer. It's just important to come there prepared and attend the meetings, but also understand that there is board etiquette that you need to be aware of. Not only attending the meetings, but that you understand what is your role as a trustee, what is the role of the chairperson, the vice chairperson, that you're aware of the agenda for the meeting and what the correct protocol is to follow. Understand the board charter, the policies, the procedures that are in place, and be brave.
Most of all, be brave. So, Irene, before we close, I think it's worth just reflecting on one key point, and that is being a trustee is actually about actively stewarding the scheme in the best interests of all its members, which is sometimes a very fine and a very, very difficult balance, because it requires judgment, accountability, and the willingness to ask difficult questions and make difficult decisions when necessary. Thank you so much for this very excellent presentation. Thank you also for including this list of acronyms and abbreviations. We refer to them all the time, so it's very important that trustees know some of these, most of them. And I think in every module so far, we've included a slide with the relevant abbreviations and acronyms for that particular topic. So thank you, Irene. And thank you for that excellent, excellent presentation.
But thank you, Heidi, for this opportunity. And just to let people know that they can contact you or myself with any queries.
Yes, and we, on 2 slides back, I think, we included our email addresses. So the one after that one, yeah. So if you need any questions answered, please feel free.